Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for checking out my channel. Here it is, by popular demand. You wanted to see more about my photography and the stories behind the photograph? Here you go. This is the first episode. Welcome to my Laguna Beach studio. My name is Cheyne Walls and I make my living as a nature fine art photographer. And like I said at the beginning, this video series is going to be more about the photograph itself. It's called The Story Behind the Photograph. And I thought it'd be fun to start off with this piece. This piece is titled Eden and it's taken up by the hot springs by Mammoth Lakes, California. Because there's such a good story behind this piece, this is why I thought to start with it. This image is actually 6 images stitched into one piece. Now, for like most of my photography, I stitch a lot of images together. One, for file size, so we can print this large and not lose detail or clarity. And also, two, just to kind of create and represent the landscape how I want it represented. So I'm not, held to a 3 1/4, 2 1/4 viewpoint. I can see, I can photograph, I can showcase how I want the image, the final image, to look size-wise. So that's, if you look on our website, you'll see some images are completely kind of weird candy-wampus sizing. That's why. This one though, unlike my other ones that are stitched, those are usually stitched and they're taken within, a couple seconds of each other. This one, this image took, if I remember correctly, about 14 hours to do without the camera moving. Well, the camera moved a little bit, and that's why I'm holding this. This is a Nodal Ninja, and to get all my separate images to create that final image to line up, I use this. And what this does is, depending on the lens I'm using, I can set the degree of the camera, how it moves up or down, left or right, however you need it, around 360 wise. So each time I move the camera, it'll click into place. So like this image, if I'm doing it over a long period of time, moving the camera to get the viewpoint that I want to see, each time I go back to another spot, it'll click right back into the same spot. So I can layer over, as well as when I am stitching the images together in post, they line up, I wouldn't say perfectly, but pretty darn close. So I can mask off the stitching them together to create this. Now this one, as you can see, we have the Milky Way, we have snow, and we have the beautiful hot springs of Mammoth Lakes. And this one was titled Eden just because it had that kind of that new life, that Eden feel to it when I was sitting there. It was maybe 15, 16 degrees out. As you can see, there was snow covering the landscape, but along the hot springs here, you can see here, the grass is still green. It was still pretty warm from the hot springs, the steam shooting up. It was a great scene. I was very excited to be able to capture it. Like I mentioned earlier, this was over a 15, 16 hour period, because what I needed to do, I needed to get the Milky Way, and just certain times a year when the Milky Way becomes perfectly straight down, just to create beautiful, I forgot the name of that mountain peak, but just comes straight down through the mountain, the valley, into the creek. And I just love that, just that symmetry of this shot. But to get this exactly lit how I want to go, because obviously I had to shoot at night for the Milky Way, to match this all up perfectly, I had to get pretty much a sunrise to middle of the night Milky Way. And how I did that was I found my spot on the ridge, set up camera, got everything laid out, leveled out, everything even to the world as possible with this thing. So again, it's less work for me in post when I stitch them together. And what I wanted is the valley is actually taken at sunrise. That's before the sun even came up, so pre-sunrise, pre-dawn, just to get that nice light without creating the shadow of a sunset. Because as you can see here, the sunset light would have created harder shadows. And they wouldn't have been color tones. I like the color tones. Sunrises to me, especially on the West Coast, seem to have a little bit more yellow to them. I want that yellow tone to kind of play off the later reds and the oranges of sunset. This gives it a little bit more yellow just to give it a little bit more separation as well. So here is a long exposure. If you get up close here, like you can see on these pieces, the river is moving. This is probably about a minute exposure. I want a lot of motion in the water. But the tough thing about this was, this had to be lined up exactly or come back to it, because in the water you can see the reflection of the Milky Way. So that was kind of playing with polarizing filters, sunrise light, a little bit, maybe just as the sun was peeking up, playing with that. Up into the valley, farther back in the mountains, that too is also sunrise light. Just because if the sun set, the mountains would be too much in the shadows and be darker. And to expose correctly for them, it'd be so hard to get, because if the sun's coming from behind that black shadow, you'd really have to expose for the mountains, and the back behind the mountains would just be blown out. So what this was, the mountains is the bottom of the mountains is sunrise, excuse me. It's a sunrise in the beginning of the mountains, and towards the top is a late sunset, which then merges into the oranges. That's another late sunset. And now this is where the photograph got a little bit easier for me, is up here the clouds are moving. So I was able to pick the perfect timing with the clouds coming through to kind of create my stitching points, where everything melded together, so to speak. So in between the mountains are mixed between sunrise and sunset light, mixing into the clouds, which are all sunset lighting. And then that obviously got darker as the Milky Way appeared. And the Milky Way, I think at that point, was right level at 11 o'clock at night. So once I got that and was pointing straight down, got the most purple I could, going through filters, and then that, after 15, 16 hours, that is the piece. Since these were multiple exposures over a full, 14, 15, 16 hour a day, I did all my settings, pretty much everything from ISO, focal length, f-stop, shutter speed, everything had to change to get the right exposures. It was kind of added to, in my mind, the playfulness of the piece, as well as just to get everything perfect that, obviously you'd never see this with the naked eye, but just kind of a fun play on what you could do with photography, how beautiful that area is, and just highlight it kind of as a dreamy Eden, just a real interesting feel of the art piece. Now I use an Alpha 12TC travel camera with the Phase 1 digital back. So it's medium format. So that really helps me with the detail and clarity. But if you go down to here, the front again, I want the long exposure to get that water moving. But coming up, the mountains and everything, that wasn't too bad. That was a couple seconds to get the correct exposure. Same with the sunset. But the big one here is capturing the Milky Way. And if you've ever done Milky Way photography, astrophotography, this is very tough to do because you have to have a fast enough shutter speed to get enough light in there, but the stars can't move. If you slow down the shutter speed like I did for the water, you'll get star trails. Nothing wrong with that, but I only wanted the motion in the water, not the star trails. So what I had to do, and this was really tricky, when by nighttime I was only concentrating on the sky, and I had a little bit of wiggle room because if the camera did move or wasn't the end of the world because it's so easy to blend with the clouds, and now I'm going into darkness. Down here it would have been a lot tougher because if a camera moved, a tree wouldn't line up, and that'd be very difficult to fix in post. But up here, what I had to do, I had to really shoot up my ISO, which ISO for a digital camera, same as film, the higher the ISO, the more accepting it is of light. Now pumping up the ISO leads to other problems. Film, it's reciprocity. Digital, it's noise. And so there's a middle balance where you have to get the ISO high enough to be able to be sensitive enough to collect enough light to capture the Milky Way. But also too, if you just take it up to 6400, or if you take it way, 12,800, even the best cameras, you're still going to get a lot of noise. And so you just have to open up, f-stop, for capturing the Milky Way. But just one of those things where if you find it, and it's different each place, it's different with the digital system you have, it's different with the lens, it all depends, you have to play with that. But that was kind of a tricky part to get enough color. I didn't want it popping because I think that looks a little fake personally. I wanted to get it just perfect where it looks somewhat natural, it melds together really well. But then also too, if you look at a print this size, you can come up to it and see there's very, very, very little pixelation. And that's what I really strive for in my prints. It might not be the brightest, most colorful. I mean, we do our best at that with the right lighting and everything, the correct exposure. But if I were to make this 2 or 3 stops brighter, it would look great online, but in print, you come up to this and it's all just pixelated. In my personal opinion, I think it looks awful. But for this piece, I am totally excited for how it came out. I've been trying to capture this scene for years because I just absolutely love the beauty of the hot springs running through this valley, keeping the grass still green when there's snow everywhere else, and just how perfect nature works symmetrically, coming down with the Milky Way that just comes right through the valley. That is incredible. And again, it took me years for everything to come together, because a lot of times too, with the drought that California's been in, when the Milky Way lined up, there wasn't enough snow on the mountains, or it didn't work where I needed a lot of snow to really highlight the difference between the green grass, the steam. I mean, because also too, it was really cold out. It was below freezing at the time. So that steam coming from the hot springs just really bellowed out and just gave these great steam trails, as you can see here. It really just adds to the piece. It becomes just a magical fairy tale-like expression. And then I was really excited how this piece turned out. So that's kind of the story, more the story behind my artwork, what goes into it. And this piece here, what we do is we print on a metallic, or at least this one is metallic fine art paper, and then it's adhered to UV filtering museum acrylic. That's what gives this kind of this clean look, which I love. You don't need a frame for it. It can just go straight on the wall. If you want more information, sizing, pricing, there's a link down to my website. And as well too, these are all limited edition prints. We only do 18 of these. All the pieces that come out of mine, all the limited editions, there are only 18 prints that we do. So yeah, if you want more information, feel free to visit our website, link below. I hope you enjoyed this first episode of the story behind the photograph. Leave some comments below if you want to hear more about camera stuff, technical stuff. Let me know what you want to learn about or hear about, and I'd love to put in these videos. Thank you again so much for watching. Cheers. This is one of my favorite pieces I've ever done, not only for all the technical reasons and, full, 14, 15 hours to do it. It came together so well, and then also too, the stories. It had a great story while I was shooting it. When I was cleaning up at night and it was pitch black, my girlfriend was with me and we could hear the coyotes howling. And it sounded like they're getting closer and closer. And I wasn't worried too much, but I was packing up the gear, we're walking out, and all of a sudden I turn around and there's just over a dozen beady little eyes just looking at us. And my heart just dropped, and I slowly was walking back. You could hear the howls. They sounded like they're just on top of you. We got back to the truck. We threw everything in. We were all pretty scared. Flip on the lights. It was just a bunch of deer trying to find any grass they could that wasn't covered in snow.